I like horror games a lot. I wouldn't consider myself a super fan, but I do deeply love a lot of horror games and horror series. That's why Little Nightmares stayed in the back of my mind when I first saw it. I remembered watching some trailers a year or two before it came out and then forgetting about it. But then I saw it on sale on a site I use and I thought, hey, why not? I finally played through the game in about 3 or 4 days in late summer of 2020 and I really enjoyed it. The subtle storytelling in the game done through the interactive world as well as the quiet and unspoken scenes was really cool. The atmosphere was fantastic, and I also really enjoyed picking out the Studio Ghibli influences. I know it might be kind of cliche to say this, but playing what felt like a Studio Ghibli horror game was really cool to me. I liked it enough to say that it's probably one of my favorite games that I played last year, especially in late 2020 considering some of the other games I played. So, of course, I decided to pre-order the second one. And here it is! Little Nightmares 2 on the Nintendo Switch. I'm kinda glad I picked it up on the Switch, it seems like they're already running out of copies. I started it a couple of days ago and have already 100%ed it. I think the game is fantastic, but I still wanted to talk about it because my feelings are a bit more complicated than that, and there's also a lot in this game to talk about, so let's get into it. In Little Nightmares 2, you play as Mono, a very tiny kid on a journey to a place called the Pale City. You eventually pick up a partner and make this long journey together. If you've seen or played the first one, you kind of know what you're in for. You move from left to right, climbing and running around various environments. You do this while trying to avoid or run from the monstrous adults, if you can even call them that, and solving various puzzles and situational conundrums along the way. Both Little Nightmares and Little Nightmares 2 play in this third-person diorama style. It's in 3D, but with a side view angle and a left-to-right progression system. Just like the first game, it's kind of a realistic physics-based platformer. You jump from thing to thing, climb and grab onto ledges, similar to Uncharted or Assassin's Creed, and can pull and carry things around that feel like they've got weight. This can be a little frustrating at times because of the viewing angles and the occasional clunkiness of the controls. I had a few times where I kept missing a jump and falling to my death, and it didn't really feel like it was my fault. There were also a few times it felt like the game just missed my inputs, which was also very frustrating. This didn't happen enough that I felt like it's a big detraction from the overall experience, but it did happen enough that I noted it and did think about it when I was finished and writing this. The physics system also plays into the newly added combat in the game. It's really simple, honestly. Since you're this tiny little person, a lot of the objects are about as big as you are, and you swing them with what feels like amazing force. This makes every blow you land feel very satisfying in my opinion. The combat is only really used a handful of times in the game, but it felt effective and definitely added to the overall experience. This added combat mechanic might also be why the game also feels far more fast-paced than the first one. You move from area to area in a flash, with what felt like far more chase sequences, action, and progression. It's in my opinion one of the game's greatest strengths and weaknesses. Speaking of the environment, wow, this game is fucking pretty. I remember thinking at the start like, wow, this game looks pretty good, but then when you finally get to the Pale City, man, I was just blown away by some of the scenic views in this game. Most of the game takes place in the warped Pale City, but even if similar, a lot of the scenes have amazing small touches that I really loved. I found myself more than once just stopping to walk around and take in the environments I was in. Literally, just staring off into the distance at these buildings that seem to curve inward and outward as if towards and away from something. I think I like the environment of this game way more than the first. Both seem to have a similar design philosophy in the environment and the scary themes, but the setting in this one is way cooler to me, and especially with the different themes of the game's universe being applied. There's also these little scenes and rooms that you can find that are also really neat. And one of the collectibles in the game are like these glitching corpses of people, and you can find their bodies in a few rooms in these elaborate setups. One of these rooms seemed to reference to the lady from the first game, which was pretty cool. A few of them are even references to these comics that you can get in this Little Nightmares 2 comics app. I thought this was really cool when I figured it out. Even without the comics and references to the first game, the environmental storytelling in this game is just fantastic. There is barely any dialogue in this game at all, so most of the stories told are implied through actions or in the environment, and it's done very well. Even if you don't understand it at first, this room tells a story. Something happened in here, and you can piece it together with what's left. This goes for so many different places in the game. At the beginning of the game, as you're traveling through one of the first areas, you keep running into these bodies in bags and traps, so you know that something nefarious is going on. Then, you eventually reach a house. I think you already kind of know through gameplay context that the person in the house has something to do with the corpses and traps, but this is basically confirmed not only when you help the other kid escape in the basement, but when you run into a room that is literally just a setup of 3 stuffed people having dinner. Like taxidermied, it's terrifying. This is pretty disturbing when you first run into it, and gives you a pretty clear picture of what is going on. Oh! Whoever lives here likes to hunt and stuff people. Why? That isn't really answered, but a lot of the bigger overarching questions in the game are still left up in the air by the time the game ends. Why are there piles of clothes lying around? Why does the teacher teach little porcelain-headed puppet students? Because I guess that's what she's always done. Speaking of the teacher, the creature design is cool in this game, but most of it didn't actually scare me. I think the teacher and an enemy I'll mention in the light spoilers section were 2 of the scariest enemies in the game to me. This doesn't mean that the game isn't disturbing or creepy. Really, the atmosphere in this game is absolutely fantastic. The sound design, whoever worked on it, did a fantastic job. From the booming of an old hunter shotgun, to the chattering teeth of a bitey teacher, or the crack of bones being broken. The effects sound great. The music is also pretty good. Most of it's ambient music, with the usual horror music tropes, crunchy instrumentals and abrasive violins to moaning and droning horns. The few tracks that really stuck with me after the game were some of the character themes, as well as some of the more, I don't know, mystical sounding ambient music. It's hard to put into words. As I said earlier, similar to the first game, there is very little spoken dialogue in the game. There's a button you can press to basically say hello or hey to your partner, and they'll respond back, but that's really it. This game is able to convey so much through grunts, yells, growls, action, and motion. How'd you see me? With barely any dialogue, and that is awesome. As I mentioned earlier, this game moves pretty fast. I'd say it's my biggest complaint with the game. It's so short. I like short games and definitely have no problem with them, but this game introduces to you so much and then just ends it in a snap. The ending isn't unsatisfying or anything, but I was left wanting more. So many of the cool concepts and ideas, while maybe not wholly original, were done very well in this game. And when it felt like you'd just begun to really dig into them, the game says, okay, time to move on to the next cool thing, which is great, but I wanted more of the last cool thing. I actually want to talk about a few of these really spectacular scenes now. So we're going into what I'll call the light spoilers section. There won't be heavy story spoilers or ending spoilers, but I will be talking about specific scenes and set pieces in depth that could spoil a few cool moments. Just a heads up. Going back to this game being fast-paced, I think the first big implication of this is how you escape and defeat the first pursuer enemy. You run through fields, a swamp, and finally a barn with him lumbering quickly behind you, blasting shotgun shells. The coolest scene is the finale of this sequence, where you enter a shed, knock a shotgun off of the wall, and literally blow this guy away. It's really awesome, and I was left saying, okay, if the rest of the game is as cool as that, then I'm gonna love this game. I think overall the school segment is better than the wilderness segment, but nothing really beats the finale of the wilderness segment. That was one of the more satisfying killings of one of the monster people. I think the part where she's playing piano is pretty neat, and also the segment in the lunchroom where you disguise yourself as one of the bullies is really, really cool. I know if you don't bump into any of the bullies, you're fine, but that was such a cool and intense scene no matter what. Also, when the teacher chases you out, that was really scary and cool, but it kind of got ruined for me because some of the clunkiness of the end part of it led to me dying over and over again, and I got a little frustrated. I pressed the jump button! I still really want to know why there's still so many full sets of clothes just lying around, like people just up and disappeared. Similar to the character that committed suicide in the first game, it's one of those questions that doesn't really ever get answered. Another segment that I wanted to talk about in this part of the video takes place in the hospital. They introduce these living mannequin enemies, first with these living hands that crawl around and you have to fight them in the combat segments, you know, crushing them with these big weapons with this sickening crunch. But eventually you get introduced to these full-bodied moving mannequins. This segment is really cool, if kind of unoriginal. You see, the mannequins move when they don't have light on them. It's kind of a trope at this point for sure, but the game utilizes it so effectively and makes this scene just so cool. I wouldn't say I was extremely scared, but this segment was definitely intense, and the scene where you're running down the hallway with all the hands coming out of the doors is so cool. I still do wonder why only some of the mannequins move while the others don't, but again, unanswered questions. I really enjoyed that sequence overall, and while I had some suspicions that the mannequins might be alive from the start, I was still surprised when they did the whole light thing. Running around and being forced to shine a light onto the mannequins is just, ugh! I wanted it to last longer though. You literally go through like a handful of connected areas that maybe took around 20 minutes to get through, and it's never used again. I was so disappointed because that section was so neat and intense. But they just use it once for a few little areas and then move on. The next big thing I wanted to talk about is the part later in the game with the viewers and the teleporting TVs. See, that looks like a normal human being almost. And there's why I said almost. So there's this signal coming from the tower at the center of the Pale City that causes these monster people to watch these TVs, and you can begin teleporting through them. You eventually get a remote that you can use to flip the TVs on and off, and you have to solve a few puzzles with this, maneuvering around the monsters to make progress while teleporting through the TVs. And again, this was really cool and a lot of fun, but it still didn't feel like it lasted long enough to me. This whole segment was maybe 30 to 40 minutes long, and then again, it's just gone. And man, like, I guess I'm glad that these sections didn't overstay their welcome, but it really felt like I just began to experience them before the game wanted to move on to other things. This isn't a bad thing, I think. A lot of this game is fantastic, so it's not like the best parts were just these parts. It's just that these parts were exceptional and really stick out in my head, and the game just moved on from them a little faster than I'd have liked. Alright, and now onto the major spoiler section. You've been warned. So the girl that you pick up at the beginning of the game is 6 from the first game. You can tell from the cover that she's in the game and is probably this character, but I still didn't want to spoil it for anyone going in completely, new to the games and stuff like that. As you go through, Mono keeps using these televisions to experience some sort of vision or short-range teleport. Eventually, in the final vision, he reaches a door at the end of the hallway in all of his visions, and unleashes the Thin Man, a character that we've been seeing in passing in the past games and some of the media for this leading up to release. The Thin Man comes out of the TV, takes 6, and then disappears. You then keep trying to get over to the tower to help 6 through the TVs, until finally the Thin Man begins to chase you. This eventually leads to a final confrontation with him in the middle of the street, which leads to Mono using his powers, which are seemingly far greater than teleportation, to basically obliterate the Thin Man completely, and then teleport himself without the TV to the base of the tower. It implies that he kind of absorbs the Thin Man's powers, but it doesn't show it in a scene similar to 6 absorbing the lady's powers in the first game. You enter the tower and begin a little sound puzzle where you go from door to door following this music from a music box until you finally reach a room where 6 is. 6 has become a monster and is guarding a music box. I also just realized this now while editing, but this scene is set up a lot like when you first met 6. It's a bit more imaginative with all the toys and things, but it does have a similar setup. When you call out to her, she flinches but comes over at first. She seems to remember that you're friends or remember who you are, but then you take a hammer and you smash the music box, and this is when things start to get weird. After smashing the music box, you're teleported to this black room. You have to smash through a door, and then you're taken back to the tower. 6 begins chasing you, and then you eventually begin what is a boss fight. This is the only real boss fight in the game, which is basically you tricking 6 to get around her and then inevitably smash the music box. When the music box is destroyed, it seems like the tower begins transforming into this giant blob monster that tries to chase and catch both of you. You run and run and run together and then reach a point where a ledge collapses. 6 reaches the other side and catches Mono as he jumps, but then for some reason lets him go. Mono falls into the chasm below, and he's stuck with the blob creature, which is seemingly waiting for him as it makes a small mound in a chair for him to come to. When you climb onto the chair, Mono seemingly goes insane, or it's also implied that the creature could be kind of taking control of him or possessing him. I think the light behind him might imply that it's somehow inside of him, but you can't really be for certain, right? Anyway, he slowly, over time, grows old as he waits in the tower, waiting all these years with nowhere to go, and finally, we see that Mono himself is the Thin Man. I believe that the game kind of implies that Mono was the Thin Man all along, and he's stuck in some kind of time loop, as earlier on it seems that 6 might even know that it's Mono coming out of the TV. Why does 6 drop him? I don't know. It's truly hard to say whether she was like this the whole game, or if the transformation into the monster had some kind of effect on her. There are a few scenes in the game that can imply 6's cruelty. You can find her breaking a disembodied hand's fingers at one point. She viciously attacks one of the bullies, and if you decide to burn the doctor, she sits in front of it with, like, little care and almost some dark humor to it, and warms her hands in front of the fire that's burning him alive. The game does show that 6's short transformation into a monster has permanently changed her. As we see in the secret scene, this is when 6's dark doppelganger first appears to her, as well as her hunger, which also implies that this game is a prequel rather than a true sequel. You can see 6's darkness point at a poster of the Maw. There are a lot of unanswered questions, just like in the first game. Why'd she do it? Will Mono ever escape the infinite loop he's seemingly stuck in? What is with all the people's clothes just sitting everywhere? Like they were zapped away, just leaving their clothing. Why is the world even like this, if there are seemingly normal children in this world as well? We might never know. So much of this game comes at you like lightning, and leaves you just wanting more and guessing. And while that isn't bad or unearned in any way, I really do just wish there was more to this game. More story, more areas, longer use of the cool mechanics shown, more answers. Overall, I don't know if I got it across, but I really like this game. The biggest problem for me is obviously just how short it is. And it's not just because it's short. It's just that it doesn't really let you sink your teeth into a lot of the coolest ideas, both story and gameplay wise, before it kind of moves on from them. I played through the entire game and 100%ed it in about 2 days, as I said at the start. I think this game is entirely worth playing. This game shows off so much more of the world of Little Nightmares, and how much more it can be and can be explored. It answers some questions, but leaves us with even more. It gives us so many cool moments, but then ends them far too soon. If you do play the game, or watch videos on it, or whatever, just tell me one thing. Did Little Nightmares 2 leave you as hungry for more as it did me?